Welcome back to this episode of Japan's top business interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, president of Dale Carnegie Train Japan. And my special guest today is an old friend of mine, Paul Goldsmith from Aquent. And Paul I have known each other since about 2001 when I moved back to Tokyo from Osaka. So long friendship. Paul, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Paul, you've had a really amazing career in total, and the Japan part too is amazing. So just walk us through a little bit, how you got to be at Aquent today and your Japan story, basically.
Okay, I'll go back to 1985, which is when I came to Japan for the first time as a young 28-year-old. And I came over here to help ADIA, which is today called Adecco, set up in Japan. So that was 1985. We opened 4 offices very quickly. And I was part of the team that came over here with an executive from Switzerland. And we chose the locations and got ADIA, now today Adecco, up and running. So amazing to think that from 4 offices, it's now one of the leading agencies in Japan. So my background and the majority of my career has been in recruiting, staffing in one form or another. And I went back to the UK, then spent a little bit of time, 5 months in Australia, in Sydney. And then I came back to Japan and kind of long story, then 2 years in Boston related to the medical staffing industry. And then came back to Japan in 1990 and lived here for 22 years. And 13 of those were running my own business, which was a recruitment agency focused on bilingual IT engineers.
Which had a very cool name.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, Panache.
That's right. I always thought that was a terrific name as a company. It said a lot about the culture of the company. I thought it was great.
Yeah, I like the word. I looked up the word and it said a stylish way of doing things. And I thought, that's it. Yeah, we want to do that. We want to make things look easy. I ran that for 13 years before selling out. And then I turned a hobby into a business. I'm not sure that's always a good idea, but I really got into the world of classic cars, and I still love cars and loved cars. And I put on 3 classic car events here in Tokyo that were of significant size.
What were they called? You had a special name.
Yeah, the Tokyo Concours d'Elegance.
Beautiful.
First one was at Tokyo Midtown in the first summer that Tokyo Midtown opened, actually in the autumn of Midtown opening. Yeah, that was 2007. And then I did that 2009 and 10. And then from that, interestingly, got invited by a friend who'd helped me to Kuwait. And although I was based in Japan for 3 years in a row, I helped the Kuwaiti Prime Minister's office put on 3 events there. That was very interesting. I got to meet some amazing people, some of the biggest and best car collectors in the world and some of the world's leading car designers from the large manufacturers. And then after Fukushima hit...
that was 2011, right?
2011, yeah. Business wasn't great and my children were very young. So we decided to move out in 2012 and I went to the UK and moved to the south of England, although I'm from London, but we're in the south of England. And I worked with this British aristocrat, Lord March, now the Duke of Richmond, where on his estate, he organises 3 of probably the best car events in the UK and probably 2 of the best in the world, the Goodwood Festival of Speed and the Goodwood Revival. And I helped organise those events. I helped with sales, I helped with business development, and I worked there for 3 years. And then interestingly, all my life I've been involved in the service industry. But in the UK, long story short, I got involved in manufacturing. And so I had a peek at the British manufacturing industry, looking at carbon fibre manufacturing for the automotive sector and for aerospace. So it's a long story to explain how I got there, but I spent basically 3, almost 4 years involved in helping to put together R&D funding programs and looking at how manufacturing works in the UK. And then I came back to...
But the lure of Japan.
The lure of Japan, yeah, it's interesting. So I thought I'd probably be in the UK for a long time, but after about 6 years, got homesick for Tokyo, my old friends and contacts in Japan. And I had a chance in 2017 to come back with a marketing software company, actually involved in influencer marketing, and did a presentation at the British Embassy in Tokyo, and then ran around for a week making sales calls and realizing hey, my old buddies are still here and there's a chance to do business. and kind of set my heart to coming back again, and came back here in 2019 working on a couple of part-time projects. One, interestingly, working with Maserati Japan, helping them with B2B sales, and another, a friend of mine who runs a music production and music composition business. And then from that, in early 2019, got approached by somebody from Aquent in the US on LinkedIn. And I thought it was just a generic, hi, you're looking for a job kind of approach, but it turned out to be specifically targeting me and asking if I was interested to come and run their business in Japan, as they'd been leaderless for 2 years. So they wanted to do two things that appealed to me. One was, could you come in and run Aquent and start growing it again, so take it in the right direction. The business has always been profitable, so I have big respect for the team here, just that we were shrinking rather than growing. So that was an interesting challenge. And then the second challenge was they wanted me to add a studios business. So when I had Panache, we had a business called Panache Interactive, which was basically a web design team, and they were asking me to recreate something similar. So with those two challenges, it was almost too good to be true. So I decided
Panache Mark II in a way, isn't it?
In many ways, yes.
It sounds similar.
As Panache, we did on occasion compete with Aquent. So I was familiar with them. I was very familiar with the first general manager here, or country manager. So it was something that I was very keen to take up, and I've been very happy. I've been here since October 2019.
So, when you think back to your first leadership experiences in Japan, so we're probably going right back to that Adecco period. Now Adecco, but let's call it Adecco for the sake of making it easy. And you're transplanted from, the UK and the world to Japan. You're in Tokyo, and you're leading teams here. What were some of the challenges that you bumped into at that time, coming to grips with dealing with a Japanese workforce?
I think there was a different level of responsibility. This is a funny answer, but I remember that with the first set of people that we hired, the father of one of our staff died whilst I was here. And so for me, it was very interesting that the shacho of the company, we hired a Japanese president, took me along with him to the prayers of the deceased father of one of our staff. And I was amazed, and I was highly respectful of the fact that we as a company played almost there was a family element to the life of being an employee of a company, and that the president of the company had that responsibility to show respect to the employee and that employee's family. So that was a big eye-opener to me. I think also...
I always think of that as rather English.
Oh, really?
Growing up in Australia, we had this sort of idea of the boss of the company being the father figure, the patriarch, of course, the boss, but having the family concept in running the old-style English firms. Maybe that's gone, a long time gone, but I had that sort of image in my head, but maybe that's no longer there. But anyway, carry on.
Yeah, that probably exists in family-run businesses rather than a corporation. I was working for a multinational corporation, so it didn't exist. But yeah, that was interesting. And then I think the need to be very clear about what it is that you wanted people to do and to communicate that clearly. And also for me...
Why was that important?
Well, for me at that time, coming to Japan was the first time to deal with people that were non-native English speakers and to deal with a very different culture, and therefore to not assume that what we did back home was what was expected here or that would work here. But I remember I came to Japan at a time when foreigners were very critical of the fact that people said, Japanese don't eat hamburgers, Japanese don't like pizzas. And at that time, McDonald's was just getting off the ground, 1985. Pizzas were beginning to become popular here as well. So there was evidence that you could do new things, but maybe you need to localize it. And so I was conscious of that. The other big impact for me being in the recruiting industry was that I was coming from an environment where, a bit like a real estate broker, you were at street level in a shop, and you advertise by putting boards literally out on the street or putting cards in the window with job information, and people wandered in, to suddenly being in an environment in Japan where we were renting offices on the 4th floor, the 7th floor, the 9th floor, and people were making appointments to come and see us. I was like, wow, that's amazingly professional compared to what I was used to. So there was a whole change of mindset from that point of view. And it's not a management issue, but another big impact for me was that the company, the older, it was an older gentleman who was making our office furniture. We had some custom furniture made. He was a friend of or an acquaintance of the president of the time. Then started taking me out on sales calls. And for me, as an Englishman or as a Brit at the time, that was very bizarre. Like, why are you taking me out on sales calls? And he said, it's very simple. Because if I help you grow, you'll open more offices, and therefore you buy more office furniture, and my business grows if your business grows. So that was a very interesting approach, which I'd never seen or come across in the UK.
Long-term strategy.
Yeah, clever.
For the first time, right?
Yes.
You see the long game here.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Inside your success lies my own success. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
And so when you were actually, your first team, how big was the first team you were dealing with who were reporting to you?
So, well, actually, the first team didn't really report to me. So my first real experience of managing people here was when I came back in 1990, and I had a couple of people working for me. I was working with a very clever American doctor who was a biotechnology specialist, and I had a couple of people working for me. So that was a very small team. And I think my first real experience of leadership and management was when I set up Panache in 1993.
So here's a brand new company.
Yeah.
You're a foreigner.
Yes.
And no mother or Japanese father has got the slightest interest in any of their children working for an unknown startup company run by a foreigner. They want them to join a brand name, big Japanese company where it's stable, lifetime employment, all good. How did you convince people to come to this startup?
Well, at the time, we were doing something that was new. So at the time when I started Panache, we were focused exclusively on providing Apple Mac specialists. So we were very focused on the desktop publishing market, on people that had Mac skills, and on companies that wanted creative people.
Okay, so just wind that back a bit.
Yeah.
Why did you choose that niche? You're starting the company, you've identified a niche.
Yes.
Very specific, very unusual, as you say. How did you come to that conclusion?
Okay, so there's two good reasons. One, life has come full circle, because at that time there was a company called Mac Temps, which over a period of time changed its name to Aquent. And Mac Temps in Boston, actually they started in Harvard, Cambridge. They had focused on Mac operators in the US and were doing very well. They were growing because of that. And also back at my time in ADIA in the UK, we opened a specialist division for word processing. And back in that time, word processing was a move on from people using typewriters. It was the precursor of the PC. And what I saw was that as a generalist staffing agency, we sometimes struggled to do business with big corporations. But once we had this specialist division, those very companies took us very seriously and were giving us business that they never gave us before. So it showed me that if you were in a niche, that there was an opportunity to do business with companies that wouldn't do business with you otherwise. So having seen that there was potentially a market for Mac operators and potentially a market for a niche company that could go up against the bigger guys, and at that time it would have been Temp Staff was the company, and Persona and Manpower were already relatively big. I felt there was an opportunity to compete with them as a very small entity. There were four of us in the beginning, me and three others.
So how did you lure them into this niche?
So one of them I'd met beforehand through an introduction, and actually the others were friends of friends that were introduced to me. So, or there was one person, I remember headhunting the receptionist of the shared office that I worked in at that time, and she came to work for us on the admin side. And then the other people had been introduced through friends and acquaintances. Mm-hmm.
So how did you find it? You know, you're the owner, founder, they work for you. What were some of the challenges you found as the now owner of the company? Because this is your dough.
Yes.
You know, it's a little bit different when it's your dough.
Yes.
You know, what was some challenges then?
Well, I go back to this point about being clear, and actually one big lesson I learned, and it's a terrible British and probably somewhat Australian trait, is irony and sarcasm. And I learned very quickly, and in fact one of my staff pulled me up on it, that it doesn't work in Japan. And therefore I learned very quickly to stop using sarcasm in business and to be very straight. And that was a very big lesson, which I've stuck to ever since. And in fact, I adhere to it with my children as well. So I brought my kids up without being ironic with them.
And in England, you had double irony.
Double irony. And it still
just
exists.
to top it right off, right?
Exactly, yes. So I think that was an important lesson. And it's something, I think if I was giving advice to a foreign, particularly a Brit coming into this market, into the Japanese market fresh, is to leave the irony at home. And you could, if you're ironic at home, that's fine. But in the office, I would say be pretty straight with people and don't tease.
And if I was giving that advice to Australians, I'd say leave the idioms at home.
Right.
I didn't realise how many idioms we use in Australian English till you get to Japan. Foreigners don't have a clue what you're talking about, let alone the Japanese. So all the idioms have to go as well.
Yeah, it's raining cats and dogs. You drive me up the wall.
There's Australia. English is full of idioms. It's unbelievable.
Exactly. Yeah, so that's all gone. Yeah, but coming back, I think so. I learned that having a vision is very important, and what I've also learned over the years is that having a strategy and presenting that strategy to your staff clearly and sticking to it is also very important. Also, I learned about not constantly on a monthly basis changing strategy and having the courage to see it through in the long term. That may be the year's strategy, for example, and not flip-flopping if 1 month looks a bit tough compared to others, is not suddenly panicking and changing direction.
And so what would be some of the differences? Now, you had worked in England, London, spent time, I think, in the States too, some Australia as well, right?
Yeah.
So, and also, after being in Japan, you went back to England.
Yes.
And you're working
within
an executive, with an executive team, inside an executive team. So you're observing how they interact with you, you're observing how they interact with their teams. What are some of the differences you noted between, say, in your experience, the sort of English world of leadership with the Japanese world of leadership?
Oh, that's interesting. So one of the things I noticed, certainly when I went back to the UK, and it may happen here, but certainly in my organisations I avoid it, is there's a danger that the people that speak the loudest, and certainly people that have been in organisations the longest, tend to dominate meetings and tend to dominate thinking in an organisation. And if you're brought in new, unless you're going to be a loudmouth in meetings, then what I observed is sometimes your opinions, you're not even asked your opinion in a meeting unless you're the person that's trying to interrupt or get your point of view across, unless you firmly believe in something and want to get your idea across. So that, I think, is a potential weakness. And in Japan, where I think as foreign management with experience in Japan, you notice that quite often people won't give an opinion in a meeting. You've got to draw it out of people. I've learned to ask people's opinions in meetings, and particularly on Zoom calls these days, where someone can sit silent during the whole meeting, and you assume there's no viewpoint, is making a point of asking somebody to give their point of view or ask if they have a comment.
What are some other differences you noted?
I think there's saying that now I'm kind of contradicting. So in a non-meeting environment, I think people are more willing to present ideas, and people are not afraid of making mistakes, and people may be a little bit more courageous, and people, I think in the UK, tend to be more money motivated. So when you dangle commission in front of people and the chance to earn bonus, I think people more aggressively go after that.
So that description of people who are prepared to make mistakes, take risks, that's the English model we're talking about. Okay, just to be sure, because that didn't sound very Japanese to me. But okay,
right.
So the English model is more like that. Yeah,
Yes.
okay, right, got it.
There's that.
And how about the Japanese flip side? What would that look like?
So what I've seen, I think it's very important, as I just said, in meetings to draw people's opinions out of them. The company I'm working in now, in Aquent, we've got a bunch of people that actually will proactively contribute in meetings, but that's quite unusual. You'll often get quite quiet people who've got great ideas. Unless you ask them, you don't get them, basically.
Is that a functionality of, for 2 years they've had no leader? So, as an orphaned group, to survive for 2 years, they've learnt, well, no one's leading this thing.
Yep.
We're leading it. So we better speak up and share with each other if we're going to survive here and keep going. Do you think it's a function of it? Because this is a bit unusual.
Yeah, that's quite a possibility. But I think what did happen without having leadership, well, there was leadership, but without having somebody that was prepared to take the can or that prepared to take full responsibility for a decision, a change of direction, a new idea, is that without that strong leadership, those fresh ideas don't get implemented and maybe don't get proposed. So you tend to then, you follow a steady path without taking any risks to change direction and do something different. So I think, as you can see in any organization, that you need strong leadership. And I find it amazing looking at companies of any size, how that top person strongly influences the personality of a company. And I always think, you and I are old enough, and we were here during a time when Shoichiro Honda was running Honda, and Morita-san was running Sony. And when these two gentlemen died, the companies were leaderless, were kind of rudderless for years, without that strong leadership and the charisma of that leadership. So that, to me, taught me that the leadership is really important. So you have to create a culture, and I think you have to show strong decision-making capability.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. So how do you create a culture?
I think you adhere to certain ethics and morals and decision making. I think you have to show consistency of decision making. I think with employees, you shouldn't show favoritism, and you should give everybody equal opportunities, and you should catch people doing things right. I think it's good.
As opposed to the usual.
Yeah, catching people out, basically, and criticising.
Yeah.
I have a personal habit based on experience of not delivering bad news on a Friday. I think it's unfair for employees to ruin their weekend if you put somebody on warning, or you fire somebody, or there's something unpleasant's going to happen that you need to tell people about. I think it's unreasonable messing up somebody's weekend. So
it's not only that. I mean, there's research. I read this research too about that the suicide rate for people who are let go tends to be much higher for those let go on a Friday compared to a Monday.
Really?
Yeah. Because they got the whole weekend to brood about it.
Exactly.
And it depresses them, drives them down. Whereas Monday, they've still got a whole week of work, and that's somehow they've got to adjust to it, So yeah, there's a scientific reason for not delivering bad news on a Friday,
Yes. So I think those are certain issues. And you say about creating a culture. Something I learned from Carlos Ghosn when he was at his peak and he was respected here was that if you saw what he did when he came in to rescue Nissan, he had a few very simple goals that the company understood and that were, at a stretch, attainable. And he repeated these goals very frequently, so the staff kind of knew where they were. And I remember him saying at a presentation I went to of his that the difference between a good and bad company is when you ask senior management what's the strategy and the goals, and then you ask the guy at the sharp end of the stick, how similar are those visions? In the sense of, did the woman or the guy who's doing the job understand what senior management expects from them?
Well, we've got this beautiful painting on the wall here. In many companies we train at, they have the vision, mission, value statement, behind the glass, on the wall. And when we're in training, often we'll go in there, I'll take it off the wall, turn it around and face away. Then I'll ask the group, what's the vision of the company? Nobody ever gets it.
Right.
What's the mission? Nope. They usually have typically 5 values, typically 5. Collectively, a group of 30 people, they come up with 2, maybe 3. They never get 5. So I always think to myself, if I'm the president sitting up there in my executive suite with the plush carpet, and very, quiet, and thinking that, yes, I've got the culture organised, I've got the strategy organised, I've got the communication organised, it's all happening. If you don't remember the vision, mission and values, I don't know how you can live them.
Yeah.
You can't. So there is that issue of we know, but do they know? And more importantly, do they know and then execute on that, which is the other part of it. So how do you make sure that's happening? You may be imagining that, yes, we're very clear here at Aquent what's going on, and I'm giving people direction and they've got a clear pathway. How do you know that message is actually penetrating?
Good question. I think one way is, as you said, keep those goals or those concepts simple. So last year it was very simple. It was focus and confidence. So I wanted people to be focused on what they were doing and work smarter, not harder. And confidence was in building your self-confidence. And confidence builds success, and in turn success builds confidence. It's kind of circular. And we have a monthly all-company meeting, and that's a chance to reinforce those values. And I think the way you know it's happening is if you see people making the right decisions. So when there are decisions to be made, and they're usually around probably ethics in some form or another. Did we do the right thing? Did we, if it was a question of giving money back or not giving money back, did we give money back? Because actually we should have done. Were we fair on pricing? So it's small decisions, I think, that staff make that show they understand the company's values and they understand what's expected of them. And I think that if there are very few crises to solve, that's also probably an indication that the staff get it and they're implementing what's expected of them.
Okay. And so talk about engagement for a minute, because every time I've been involved with big organisations doing these staff satisfaction engagement surveys, they're always a nightmare. And invariably, you wind up in Singapore or Hong Kong, the APAC hub. All the top leaders, country managers are there. They're putting up the results, global results, and they're all pretty good. Everywhere else, they get APAC, and APAC is like one rung down, and Japan's at the bottom, And so suddenly you get these people who don't know Japan, who don't know Asia particularly either, now harassing you. What are you going to do about that Japanese number? So it's always been a difficult one, because the surveys don't necessarily reflect reality maybe, but there is this issue in Japan that often people feel the engagement is not high. How do you think about getting people more engaged in the business?
Well, it's funny you should ask me that, because when I joined Aquent, I was told that always in the company surveys, the annual surveys of staff satisfaction, Japan is at the bottom. And head office in the US always wondered, does that mean that the Japanese staff are less happy in the organisation or less satisfied with the way that they're managed? And so I raised this point when I joined. And it was pointed out to me that in the way surveys are taken, and the upper quartile and the lower quartile tend to be the figures that are taken note of, in the middle get discounted or thrown away. So a lot of Japanese tend to mark in the middle. So if it's out of 10, they give things 6, occasionally 7, but almost never an 8, 9 or 10. So even if they're impressed with the company, they won't state it in the ways that maybe the West and in the US, the Europeans and Westerners typically will do. So I think from that point of view that probably the staff are no less satisfied than their rest of the world peers. And I think from a personal point of view, I judge it by, I wouldn't say the happiness level, in the sense of, I know when I saw staff coming into the office looking at the way they interact with each other, and there's a high degree of camaraderie, certainly in this company, and an affection. And when this pandemic kicked off and the wearing of masks was not as ubiquitous or prevalent as it is now, you have to remind people like, hey, you need to be wearing masks, or you guys are or girls and guys are a bit close. You need to move apart, because there was this. You could see there was this sense of affection between colleagues about working with each other, which shows me there's a high level of satisfaction. And I think the fact it's a fearless environment, i.e. people can make mistakes and not worry about it, so they can interact with me as the Japan country manager and their boss fearlessly.
Well, that I find very interesting, because in most organisations this is a no defect culture.
Right.
You know,
True.
In many Western companies are run by CFOs who make a calculation. We'll take a 5% defect rate and we'll get this much profitability. If we go to 100%, no defect rate, we'll get this much profitability, a lesser number. We'll go for the 5% defect rate, and they're happy with it. We'll do the returns or whatever they've got to do because they make more money. Japanese companies like, no, it's zero defect rate. So, and this transforms itself also, I think, into companies where individuals, when they're brought up through the Japanese system, you're scolded for mistakes, and in the old money, yelled at, by your boss. And people have related to me, their boss was throwing ashtrays at them back in the good old days, screaming at them publicly. So that don't make a mistake, no error mentality I found in many Japanese companies very strong. So when you say people here are fearless and people are prepared to make mistakes, that's very interesting. How did it get to that point here? How did you arrive at that capability?
So I had an example this afternoon where a couple of my staff said to me, hey, Paul, we're taking risks. We listened to your comment about don't let excellence be the enemy of good. So we're going after good instead of excellence, and we're not holding back because in the recruitment industry, we're not trying to make a 100% perfect match. We're getting close enough. So we're taking a bit of a risk and allowing the client maybe to make that decision as to whether it's good enough, rather than maybe having an effect on productivity by going after excellence. So I think there's an understanding that an element of risk is not a bad thing. And so we've talked about it in the organisation at these monthly meetings. And to my delight, it's clearly sunk in with a number of people. And I think also that there's another issue there, which is that I think we as senior management say things, maybe even off the cuff, or we make a throwaway remark, and it's taken on board. And in Japan, I think a lot of remarks made by senior management are taken on board, and the team pursue that, or they go off in a certain direction that you as senior management had no idea that remark was taken so seriously. And that's happened to me a couple of times. I can't think of a specific example, but people have said to me, oh, we're doing this now because you mentioned it a couple of months ago, and I can't even remember saying it, and yet they've taken that idea on board and they've gone full pelt in that direction.
Yes, mistake handling is quite interesting in Japan, in the sense of when I was working in I shouldn't say bank, it's banking, highly regulated, lots of rules, lots of procedures, big thick operations and manuals like you would not believe it. And so people would get themselves into trouble there when they didn't follow a procedure. So if you fessed up and said, hey, look, I didn't follow that procedure, then yes, you'd get some degree of challenge to that, and maybe some degree of harsh words from the boss or some small penalty or something maybe. But because of this no mistake culture, what they do is they sort of literally sort of stick it in the drawer and think somehow it's going to go away. But in the banking industry, it never goes away.
Yeah.
So it's a bit like one of that sort of Disney cartoon where the sort of monster starts coming out of the drawer in the desk, takes over the entire room. And people would blow up their careers. They'd blow up their careers with the bank because not the fact that they made the mistake, that's one problem. They hid the mistake. And that hiding of the mistake was the really big problem. So I think for a lot of companies, if you have a very black and white culture of, punishing mistakes and no grey, then people tend to make mistakes and hide them. And that can have really major repercussions. I know myself, I'd much rather someone came to me and said, look, I've done something wrong. And then my brain would not go into scold and punish mode. It'd go into fix mode because I've got the money, power, authority to fix it. And if I know, but invariably, you get told when it's too late.
Yeah.
And no money or time will fix that problem, you know. And that was always a scary thing about Japan, that at the worst time they tell you that you can't fix it. And I always say, tell me early, I can help you or fix it, you know. Yeah. But yeah, so I'm impressed that you've got that culture here, because that is not, in my experience so far, normal. That's great. So they engage. And one thing I've always thought about with engagement, it's the trigger point for innovation, because, you know, if you're not engaged, what do you care if the system's better? You know, you've got no buy-in to the whole thing. So if you're improving the mousetrap, who cares? We don't care about mousetraps, you know. So given that you've got this reasonable level of engagement you're happy with, what's the level of innovation in the team, and how do you get innovation from the team?
So in the year and a bit that I've been here, I've emphasised with team members that we need to be doing things in a more efficient way. And if we can use technology to do that, then let's find a way of applying it. So we already make pretty good use of technology in the organisation.
Things like what?
Our database system, all our email or our documentation was already in the cloud before this pandemic hit. So for our team members to go home and work from home has been really smooth and seamless. When I came into the company, we had very good video conferencing set up between the offices, so we can have...
How many offices are there in Japan?
4 offices.
4 offices. So where are they?
We have Tokyo,
and
then Nagoya, Osaka, and Fukuoka.
Oh, okay, right.
So when I came into the office, we were having meetings between the offices that was somewhat seamless, and it seemed clunky. Nowadays, it seems quite normal to be able to just have a meeting with somebody on a widescreen TV, and it seems quite natural now. So already we're applying technology there. So I've just been looking at whether there are more efficient ways that we can be doing our back office administration, the accounting, and even the way we use a database. Can we be using artificial intelligence more effectively? The way that we communicate, just the standard messaging that goes out to clients and talent. But at the same time, I think we have to balance the use of that technology with being a very hands-on, tailored, bespoke service for each talent, each job seeker that comes looking for a job through us, and each client that's looking for support from us, so that they don't feel that it's all just mechanized and they're just a number in the system. So we do our very best to give a very personalized service.
And so how do you inculcate that warmth, care, client, focus with the people? Because you're in the service industry, you trade in people.
Yep.
Actually, like us, we're a training company. Yes. Our whole business is people. And so the people who work in that industry have to have a really strong person focus with great communication skills in our case, right? So how do you, again, bring that up or further develop that or innovate that level of care of the clients who are employing you to find someone, and the individuals who are changing their career and taking a big risk doing that to go and do something on your recommendation?
So I think we balance it with a degree of training, so communication skills training, and I hear more and more frustration of older Japanese complaining about younger Japanese communication skills, written and verbal. So we look at that as an area of importance. And the other thing is from an incentive point of view. So we're basically a sales organization. So we are dealing with people. And at the end of the day, we're here to make money. And my agents are measured on performance. But I think as Aquent, and even when I had my own business, we were a strange animal in the sense that we were sales-oriented and sales-focused, and making money was important. But it was balanced with genuinely caring for the people that were looking for work, so being sensitive and empathetic to their needs, and at the same time understanding that clients were often in a hurry to recruit great people, and therefore understanding their needs and not wasting their time with incorrectly skilled people being sent through to them. And So I think we've been also, or we are, very tolerant about performance for agents and understanding that there are good months and bad months, but over a year's period, that balances out to good or great performance. And of course, if you're a consistently poor performer, then maybe this isn't the company or the industry for you. And those people, maybe of their own volition, leave, or we sit down and talk to them and maybe suggest this is not the right career for them. But I think we have to be very tolerant and understanding. So we're not, certainly in Aquent, we're not pushing people. It's not a volume numbers game, and you're purely measured on numbers. It's
Which is this an American company?
Yes.
I find that intriguing.
Yeah, it's
because
quite amazing,
American
isn't it?
companies are, in my experience, very bottom line, profit, kill or be killed, focused, and that tends to emanate from the headquarters into this culture. And so, driving people, and I know your industry, has some good players and some cowboys, and the placement registers the cash register to go ching if you make one. So at all costs, make one. Don't worry about what it does for the client, and don't worry about the individual. We got money, and we got a lot of money. So, there is that element in the industry. So how do you balance out, it's interesting, it's an American company, but they're not really, squeezing the last, oil out of the oily rag here type of thing, Australian idiom coming out there.
Yes. So that was another reason I joined the company, because the ethics of Aquent are very similar to my own and when I ran Panache, in the sense that making money is important, and we all enjoy making money and we enjoy growing the business. But at the same time, it has to be done in a way that's balanced. And because Aquent is a privately owned company still, and one of the original three founders is still CEO, for him, he's quite modest. And I think that although there's a strong ambition annually to grow the business, there isn't a necessity to squeeze every ounce of profit out of every piece of business that we do.
But that's a choice, isn't it? It's a choice around what's your positioning in the market, what's the brand, what's the culture, and what sort of people do you want to attract to that culture? How do you want to treat people? And therefore, what's the reputation you have with clients? It's all a package. It's all a package. And at different times, I've had to hire people, so I've used some of the bigger, 300 sort of people, mega stores they've got here for the industry. And you just shake your head sometimes, It's like, wow, okay. You're obviously part of a very big money-making machine here. You can feel it. You don't get that bespoke sense that you talked about before. And trust and all these sorts of things become an issue, So it's interesting that they've taken that view, but I often think that's where the trust comes in, the fact that you really are taking care for the buyer in both cases, the buyer of a career and the buyer of a staff member, new staff member. And so that's good that you have that. And I guess it's good that it fits with your philosophy. So how are you explaining that philosophy to the team, or is it just an established fabric of the way people work and you don't need to explain it?
I think during the hiring process, it's made clear what the culture of the company is. So we're results focused, but we're not driving you every day to achieve certain numbers. And that ethics and being on the right side from decision making is important in the organization. And therefore, and putting yourself in the position of the client or of the person seeking a job is also extremely important. We have these monthly meetings, which is the whole company, and each office relays to the rest of the company their successes during the month, but also failures. So we have a success story and a failure story, and the lessons learned from both. And as we both know, you learn more from failure than you do success. And I highly respect, because usually the agent that was the cause of failure, and it's nearly always down to poor communication or miscommunication, then fesses up as to something that went wrong and how that could have been avoided and what the solution to that problem was. So I think that colleagues hearing that on a monthly basis it sets a tone that they can basically adhere to, and kind of unwritten rules that they can follow as well.
So do you have a process here for having people innovate?
No, I have to confess we don't. So a lot of it's driven by me in the sense of pushing people to give me their ideas or thoughts. Or it's trying to bring ideas from outside. I've just hired a young British brand marketing manager who doesn't speak a word or very little Japanese. He's been here now for almost a year in Japan. But his appeal to me was bringing a lot of innovative thinking and experience and ideas. He comes from the UK, so he's got a lot of ideas from the UK. But also what I liked was that he spent about a year on walkabout, traveling South America, Asia, Europe. So he's bringing a lot of different perspectives, and he can apply those ideas or put the ideas forward to his Japanese colleagues and say, how do we make this work in Japan? Or will this work in Japan? Or what do you think about this? Or I think we need to give this a try. And that's a great way of combining maybe some out of Japan ideas with some bright colleagues here that are open-minded.
One thing about Japan, though, everyone groupthink, and collectivism, harmony, move together as a unit, does tend to play against innovation, because fitting in is more important than coming up with something new in this culture. So it is difficult to get people to innovate and come up with ideas. And so, encouraging people to do that is not very common in Japan. Often, I found too, as a leader, that I have to be careful about that, because I'm a bit of an ideas guy, a bit like you. I know that's how you are. And you have to sort of step back sometimes and think, is it really the best that I'm the source of a lot of the ideas here? Maybe I'm too dominant. Maybe I'm too powerful. I have a very powerful personality, so I have to be careful about that too, and give people room to innovate. And so that what you'd ideally like is, yes, I've got ideas, but everyone's got ideas, and we're getting the best of those ideas out, and we're taking the company forward. Have you had any thoughts on going forward, how you might like to be able to do that?
Well, before I answer that, I was just thinking about this groupism and conformism. So when I went back to the UK, I was surprised at how conformist everybody in one organisation is. So I was working in the countryside for a very dynamic organisation. I always say we were like an ad agency in the middle of the countryside. But I just noticed that there was a certain conformity as to how everybody dressed, behaved, acted, drinking tea in the afternoon out of a mug, and all these kind of things. It was kind of interesting. And then I noticed with my children at school that there was a degree of conformism there. I mean, even to the point, it was interesting that my children, when they first went to school and they were taking packed lunch, there was no way that they would take a Japanese bento or onigiri when every other kid was eating a sandwich, because they didn't want to stand out. So Japan always talks about the nail that sticks up being hit down, but it's the same in the UK. And the kids
were the kids wearing uniforms there?
They're wearing uniforms, yeah.
So again, that
so they conformed.
Yes, right, yeah. right.
But so it was the idea of like, hey, my lunch would make me outstanding. So no, Mum, I want sandwiches like everybody else. So Japanese mum had to learn how to make sandwiches pretty fast.
Yeah, that's interesting. But my son, when he went to primary school here, they have these parent days where you can come and watch the class or watch part of the class. He didn't like that, because Dad would turn up, obviously foreigner. All the parents are Japanese, and it made him uncomfortable to stand out, because he said to me years later, he said that when he first went there, the kids ignored him, completely ignored him, wiped him, because he was different. And it took him a while to be accepted. So he was very sensitive to standing out like that. So, yeah, and that pressure in Japan, I thought, well, there we go, the pressure to fit in Japan. It starts right from primary school or before that.
Interesting.
But what about the question of trust? Because this is a country, when you sit out of Japan, you think that Japan is a high-tech country, and the Japanese people are emotionless, and they're very sort of logical and technical, until you get here. And then you realise they're great at making technical things. They don't use many of them. Well, that's getting a little bit better today, perhaps. But the Japanese are incredibly emotional.
Very much,
Incredibly emotional, and you don't really appreciate that till you live here. So a lot of that emotionality is related to trust. You know, I trust you, so I will make an emotional choice to use you over this other company because I emotionally trust you. Logically, you may not be the right choice, but because I have that trust in you, I'm not going to choose that company, I'm going to choose you. So, you know, a lot of things like that work in your favour, work against you too. But what do you think about, how do you build trust in Japan?
Well, somebody explained it to me very simply, and they said trust is an accumulation of positive experiences. And I think that's very true. So that's, I think, in simplistic terms, how your employees trust you. So they see you making the right decisions more often than bad decisions. And I think people that do business with you trust you because you stick to your word, or they see you trying as hard as you can. And I think one thing that struck me when I came here in 1985 was that people in business and from a social point of view were willing to make an introduction to a friend or an acquaintance or a supplier at a very senior level. So somebody they've known for many years and they have a trusting relationship with. They were willing, after one meeting with you, to introduce you as a trusted individual. And then you assume the same level of trust when you went to visit or meet that person as the person introducing you. Because the assumption was that you would respect that relationship of trust and therefore wouldn't break it. And I was used to coming from a culture which was the opposite, which was that you were likely to mess up, or maybe you mess up, and therefore I won't introduce you because I need to protect my relationship with that person. So that was a big eye-opener in Japan. So I really love the fact, and it's still the same in Japan, that, and I do it nowadays, I introduce people on the assumption that you're not going to damage that relationship because you're going to respect me, and therefore you'll do your best to not let that person down that you're being introduced to.
And how about building trust with the team members? You know, what do you do proactively to build that trust?
I think you have to walk the walk in the sense of, if you're expecting people to work hard or work smart, I think you have to be seen to be doing that, not just talking about it. I think you have to be consistent. Again, with decision-making needs to be consistent and avoid favoritism, as I said before, and to be open to listen to people, so to seek out people's opinion. So when I first came into the company, I met every employee. There's only 36 of us, but I met everybody one-on-one, and I wanted to learn something about them. In fact, I learned things about people that people who had worked with them for years didn't know because they'd never bothered to ask. So I bothered to ask everybody. At that stage, we were traveling, so I went to every office and met people and wanted to know something about their business life, a little bit about their hobbies, past successes, so to understand that, so that I had a kind of a rounded picture of the individual, not just the person that was sat at a desk doing a job. So I think the fact I bothered to ask people, I think that was respected as well, that one-on-one discussion. It allowed in one or two situations where maybe somebody had a problem with their superior for them to come directly to me with an issue and not be fearful of that. And if they were talking to me in confidence, to know that that would go no further.
I had an interesting experience once at Shinsei. One of the female staff in a branch was having trouble with her boss. I went to visit the branch, and we got in a room like this, and I explained, I said, look, I'm here to be helpful, and please, share with me what's concerning you, and I'll do my best to help you. And she didn't speak. And I thought, well, don't jump in, wait, typical foreigner, don't jump in, just wait. I waited for an hour. We sat there in silence for an hour.
Wow.
And she never told me. There wasn't enough trust for her to tell me. But I didn't speak. I asked the question, and I did not, and I just purposely, I did not speak to give her the chance. I could see the wheels, going on inside her mind. Will I tell him? Can I trust him? you know, and we didn't obviously have a good enough relationship at that point for her to tell me. But I remember sitting there. I didn't think it was going to be an hour, you know. I thought, well,
Right.
5 minutes, you know. I might have to wait a couple of minutes before she tells me. It was an hour. And in the end, she said, I can't tell you. And that was, you know, after an hour. Yes. But anyway, so just thinking about, you know, with your team here, you ran your own company.
Yes.
And so you have a certain style, I guess, when you're the boss, you're the owner, and how you think about dealing with people. And now you work for a company. Mm. Is there anything you do differently in respect of how you run the business or run people?
Not a lot, because Aquent's given me a lot of autonomy, which is fantastic. My brief was grow Japan. I was like, wow, that's a great brief. That was it, basically, not how you do it. Or the understanding was you wouldn't go crazy spending money and redecorating every office, moving every office, hiring people like crazy. So I think running my own business, then going back to the UK, taught me a lot about what's the word? Frugal management, in the sense of growing things, running a business, thinking that you actually don't have a huge amount of money to spend. You can spend money, but you don't take a big risk in investing. Okay, let's recruit 6 new people because hopefully they'll bring in more business. As a friend of mine said a German friend of mine said to me years ago, hope is not a strategy.
Hope is not a strategy.
Yeah. So rather than hoping, let's do things that you're confident will work, or there's a high percentage chance it will work. So I think from that point of view, I have been able to manage people in a very similar way, almost identical way, to running my own business. I think the only difference is reporting to somebody in the US on a regular basis. But when I ran my own company, I had investors. So I had a board of directors.
You had a board, yeah.
So actually, I've been very used to being accountable to directors. And even though it was my business, I had shareholders. So I couldn't go out and buy a brand new car off my own bat. If we had a great year, I'd have to ask permission. Can I spend money on that? So I think I had that discipline all along. And I think when I went back to the UK, I worked for a couple of guys that I didn't think were very good people managers. Just the way they demotivated people. The negativity, catching people doing things wrong rather than right, not being particularly helpful. I saw a lot of internal politics in that organization as well. And so that gave me insights into how to be a more positive boss.
Hanmen kyoshi in Japanese, right? They teach you by negative example.
Yeah.
Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. And what about, I've asked you a lot of questions about leading in Japan.
Yes.
Is there anything I haven't asked you we should have talked about?
Well, that's a good question. I think that you, as a foreign manager, I think what people are looking for is of course, a degree of foreign innovation and foreign ideas and a foreign approach to management, but with cultural sensitivity. I think that's really important. I think that's maybe sets successful foreigners from unsuccessful foreigners here, is having that understanding of Japanese culture and to a certain extent the language. I think you can manage here without speaking Japanese. It helps having good Japanese or some Japanese. But at least understanding that things are not the same in Japan as they might be from your home country. But that Japan is open to new ideas and you can apply new ideas. But maybe there's a way of localizing some of those ideas. And maybe in some ways, some of those Japanese ideas are better than they are outside of Japan.
So have you had an experience where you've taken a Japanese idea back to the UK and found it worked very well? Or what new ideas have you brought into this organisation or previous organisations from outside as an example of that?
Well, I think
either direction.
Simplistically, I think in Japan you learn to say sorry in business, which in the West is still not a given, basically, when things go wrong.
Is that because of the litigious nature of Western society? Are you going to wind up in court if you admit fault?
It's cultural, isn't it? That you don't want to admit mistakes typically. It's a sign of weakness. Whereas I learned in Japan, it's actually a sign of strength. If you're the top guy that goes to a client or goes to an employee or, in our case, a job candidate and apologise. I'm sorry, we got this wrong and please give us a chance to correct it. So that's... I saw that in Japan, and people respect that, and often you strengthen the relationship through that. And I've seen in the UK particularly, sometimes it's not easy to apologise.
It's interesting too. I completely bumbled something personally myself, my own client. It was my fault, 100% my fault. And there were two pieces to this training. And so I initially apologised and I wrote off the entire fee for the first training. This is my error. I just wrote off. The training went ahead. It was no problem, but I wrote off. And then I thought about it more. I thought, you know what? The second piece, I'm going to write off the whole thing. But the client wouldn't let me write off the whole thing.
Right.
You know, the Japanese balance of getting injo, obligation, this sort of thing. If I'd written off both pieces, where the second piece was sort of unrelated to the first piece, that would have made that client feel too obligated to me because I went way over to compensate for my error. Whereas I compensated for part of it, that was okay. It was just interesting, I sort of went for the first part, no, I'll go for the whole lot. But she said, no, we'll just take that piece. You give us an invoice for this other piece, which I thought was sort of interesting, Yes. And, I mean, I'd screwed it up, basically. This little thing that I did was wrong. And just that interesting interaction of, if it maybe been a Western, they say, great, we don't have to pay any fees, we'll take the whole benefit, thank you, good. But you could just see that Japanese interaction there of, no, that would just be a bit too much obligation back to you. Right. So let's just equalise it out a bit, then we're all sort of on square again. Yep. So interesting.
My second observation would be from Japan, that Japan does very well. And I couldn't get the British company I work for to get their head around it, which was giving more to the client than they're paying for, particularly at the beginning of a relationship, is saying, okay, you're not paying us a huge amount for what it is that we're offering you, but actually we'll give you more than you're asking for, because in the longer term, you'll probably come back to us because of that. And I saw it blow up in our face with a global brand when I was in the UK. And I was asking to give more, and my colleagues thought I was mad. And I said, this, I'm sure they'll come back because of it. And of course, we screwed up. Actually, we screwed up, and we only gave what they paid for as a combination. But I think had we given more than they paid for and screwed up, we'd have got away with it. But we didn't. Yeah. So I thought Japan is very good at that. I think this kind of giri, I guess, is the apology, or it's the giving more, or it's trying to impress the client just by going that extra mile, I think.
Well, it's interesting. I couldn't go to the client with the obligatory, omiyage, the present, the cookies or whatever, to apologise, in person.
Right.
If we didn't have COVID, I would naturally do that. Japan, that's what you do. You go and you say, I'm Moshiwake arimasen, I'm terribly sorry, I screwed up, And you go through that little drama thing that they have here. And everyone's, okay, good, you showed the right manner and right sincerity, and we're good. But now with COVID, you don't have that. Yeah. Just before I get to ask you about...
one third thing as well, which is, and good companies do in the UK, but attention to detail as well, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Is just trying to get things, I talked before about perfect, but trying to make things as perfect as possible. And Japan is not 100% spot on every time, but I think in that way, people here typically will try harder to get something out of the door that's right.
Yeah, I was going to in a minute ask you about some advice for someone new coming to Japan. But just before that, we talked a little bit about COVID. And, my whole team works from home. We've been working from home since February. It's added a number of layers of complication for me as the leader and complexity. How have you found, this moving to not everyone's in the office anymore?
Right.
How do you lead people you don't get to see anymore in person? How's that been going?
So I learned from watching successful leaders, and someone like Richard Branson years ago said, stick to managing no more than 5 people. So I got slightly more on that. But and then I look at, say, a military environment, the army. If you're the colonel or the major, you don't instruct your troops directly. You do it through your officer rank, basically. So I've tried to run my business, and particularly with this COVID situation, I think even more important is relaying messages, ideas, instructions, innovation through my management team. So I typically communicate with my people through their manager rather than going directly. Because I think what I've learned, and again, that's what I saw about poor management, is undermining management by going around them and talking then directly to one of their staff members. And it hugely confuses things. And the other thing I learned from Japan is if you give somebody a task, let them finish it, even if it might take a little bit longer, is don't get someone to jump in if it's not finished. I had this happen to me years ago when I was kind of learning management here in Japan, was asking somebody, they'd gone off for lunch, it wasn't finished, asking somebody else during their lunch break, could you just continue working on that or finish it? And then the other person coming back, and like, what was that all about? And then you realise, that's really stupid. Just let them finish what it was that they're working on. So I think, managing through the management team is extreme. And that's worked very well with this COVID situation. And the other thing was I realised during the first month of lockdown last year that people were going from an office environment where they had a nice desk, a 100,000 yen chair. They were going back to their apartment where they were sitting on the floor, sitting on the bed, sometimes sitting on a sofa, but rarely sitting on a proper chair and having a desk. So I offered, at the company's expense, to buy chairs and desks for anyone in the company that wanted it.
And did people take you up on that?
Yeah, 7 of my people took me up on that. Yeah, and I figured it was worth the investment, because I thought, wow, 6 months into this, we're going to have all these backaches and chiropractors and people in trouble, basically. So at least I offered. So if they had a problem, well, that was their own fault. The offer was there.
Fair enough. So if we think about giving it some advice, someone's going to be sent to Japan to run the Japan operation.
Yep.
And you've got an opportunity maybe to give them 3 pieces of advice. What would you tell them?
Wow, 3.
Well, it doesn't have to be 3.
But it's good. Good.
But I think,
as I said to you,
if I said 7, it might be a bit taxing.
Yeah,
but
right, that's true.
3 sounds like it's doable, though.
So I think it's important to be culturally sensitive. So I would learn something about Japan before coming in and whilst here. So I'd studied Japan. I'd studied a bit about the language, and I'd study something about the culture. Some of the things that you're taught are a bit old-fashioned and don't necessarily apply today. I think this thing about, you must always bring gifts for people. I think it's embarrassing, actually, unless you know people. So I've learned over the years, often the first time you meet somebody, giving them a gift is awkward. If you meet them second or third time and you've got this great relationship going on and you haven't seen them for a while, you've gone back to the UK, you're coming back to Japan, you bring a gift, that's appreciated.
Gift giving has become a bit trickier, though, because of compliance.
Yeah.
I know we went to meet with executives from a car maker here, and we brought some cookies in the typical, Japanese routine, and we had some books, Dale Carnegie's books. They refused the cookies. They said, we will not personally accept the books, but we'll put these books in our library.
Right.
Because their compliance rules say that vendors cannot be involved in any gift giving.
Yeah.
As a policy, as a rule within the company. So that was like, okay, right. Things have changed a bit around here. In the old days, you'd always be running around with omiyage. But anyway, please go on.
So there's culture. I think being aware of culture is an issue. And I'd say also, as a new foreign manager in Japan, and let's assume let's say you're taking over a role, so you're taking over an established business, and you've been brought in to make changes or to improve performance. Then I think waiting a while, observing, talking, listening before making big changes. If I look at what I've done, probably I made some smallish changes quite quickly, but if I was going to make any really significant changes, I think as I've done is waiting a year to see how's the business running is probably right before jumping in. I think a lot of foreign managers come in all guns blazing and make big changes, often wrong changes. Some might work, but often they'll have a harmful effect on the business, and then the next guy or woman's got to come in and correct those. Or then you get this flip-flopping for many companies where they have a foreign president, then they have a Japanese president, they go back to the foreign president. So they're constantly undoing what the previous person put in place. So I think being a little bit, maybe looking at a slightly longer time frame to bring in changes. But I'd say also don't be afraid of bringing in ideas from outside, because Japanese are very receptive to new ideas. And I think another thought would be make a few friends amongst foreign, if you're a foreigner, amongst foreign community here that have been here a long time, who can be a mentor and give you advice that you can bounce ideas off, because there's a good chance they've heard and they've been through or they've heard of the same issues that you're having and can give you advice as to how to rectify that, or point you in the right direction, or introduce you to somebody that can help you solve that issue. And I'd say also would be to get close to one or two Japanese that you can trust, that again, you can ask advice, particularly cultural advice. Because what I've learned in the years of being here as well is that there's often a Japanese twist to an issue or a Japanese twist to the solution that you never think of as a foreigner. And having somebody give you their viewpoint may just give you a different perspective on it that gives you a solution.
Can you think of an example of that? I'm probably putting you on the spot.
Yeah,
but I get the sense of what you're talking about. But it's just interesting, that perspective is different. Yeah. And something you may not think to say, they would advise you to say. For example, oh, really? I didn't think of that. Yes, I'll do that. Yeah, and you get a different reaction from the client or whatever. Doesn't matter. Not required.
Yeah, I don't.
Not required.
Well, as we know, in Japan, often, especially in business, people look on what can go wrong. I think Japanese tend to be pessimistic, whereas we Westerners are optimistic. So we only think about the best. And I always remember in my own company that my number 2 guy, instead of giving him a pay increase 1 year, he wanted a company car. So I agreed. And that my finance guy said he was really concerned. Well, what if the guy has an accident? What if the guy kills somebody in the car? What? And then it affects the reputation of the company, and we got the whole issue to deal with. And from my point of view, it never occurred to me. There's a very different viewpoint. So from that point of view, then, I mean, I still went ahead and gave the guy a car. We just made sure it was fully insured. But that was it was different. That's a different viewpoint. But that's why I think sometimes if there's an issue or problem, having somebody Japanese giving you an opinion, you may not agree with it, like in that, but it may make you think slightly differently about something.
Companies have rules that you're not allowed to ride a bicycle to work.
Right. Yep.
Same reason, right? You might get injured, hit by a car, killed, or whatever. You might kill somebody running them over on your bicycle. I mean, that happens.
Yes.
So it's sort of things like, oh, wow, okay, wouldn't have thought of that.
Yeah, I think there are often viewpoints, and sometimes there are rules that initially as a foreigner you think are quite illogical. But then when you start to think through it from a different viewpoint, you kind of see where it comes from. I watched the film Silence, I think by Martin Scorsese, about the Portuguese priests in the 1800s coming to Japan to try and spread Christianity. And then a lot of them either got killed and then their followers got killed who were converted, or they were given the chance to, to give up Christianity and stay. Because the Japanese said, you can teach us things, but don't teach us Christianity. And I think for anyone that hadn't been to Japan, you think, wow, this is outrageous behavior. But when you've been in Japan a while, you understand where they're coming from. It's like you're trying to damage the harmony of our country. And we're not a united country to start off with. And the slightest different viewpoint could unbalance this very delicately balanced unity or harmony that we've got. So that's why I think sometimes getting that viewpoint is quite important, especially as a new manager coming into Japan, where things seem a little bit strange.
Thank you very much. This has been, again,
thank you.
a very
it's been
interesting,
long. I hope.
very interesting conversation about many aspects.
Well,
of
if
living in
anyone's
Japan.
listened to the whole thing, thank you very much indeed. I'm very impressed. Thank you.
Well, yes, it has been a very fascinating journey through Paul's leadership experiences in Japan, which have been many and varied. And please join us again for the next episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews.